At the Texas border with Mexico, along the Rio Grande, lies an artifact of the Mexican-American War that must be seen to be believed. Today we travel to Eagle Pass, Texas to explore the ruins of Fort Duncan.
Texas is full of lost history, from lost cemeteries to abandoned buildings, from the infamous to the obscure. Hitch a ride and travel across the Lone Star State, looking for hints of Texas' colorful past, our lost history. This is Expedition Texas, and we're gonna find it.
Prior to the establishment of Fort Duncan, a temporary post called Camp Eagle Pass was located at the site at the start of the Mexican-American War in 1846. Because of its strategic location at Eagle Pass on the east bank of the Rio Grande River, a permanent post was established in March of 1849. Called Fort Duncan in honor of James Duncan, a Mexican-American war hero, the post was established by Captain Sidney Burbank and 3 infantry companies. Like Fort McIntosh and other posts along the river, it guarded the international boundary, scrutinized the traders crossing, and protected the settlers and immigrants. The post consisted of a storehouse, 2 magazines, 4 officers' quarters, and a stone hospital, in addition to quarters for enlisted men. The fort was significant because of the trade crossing into Mexico at Eagle Pass, its location along the California Road, and its position for scouting against Indians in the 1850s. In May 1859, the fort was abandoned and troops transferred to Camp Verde. However, when a number of disturbances along the Rio Grande River occurred, the fort was re-garrisoned in March of 1860. When the Civil War broke out, the fort was abandoned again when Federal troops left in March of 1861. It was then occupied by Confederate troops and was known as Rio Grande Station. By 1870, a number of Seminole Indians were working at the fort as guides and scouts. By 1933, the fort had again been closed, and though the U.S. government still owned the land, the city of Eagle Pass was allowed to develop and maintain the old post as a public park, on the condition that the government could reclaim the post for military or other reasons at any time. However, just 2 years later, the property was given over to the city. Eagle Pass Mayor Ramsey Cantu talks to us now about the importance of Fort Duncan to the city of Eagle Pass and the history of the border city itself.
Yes, well, as you know, the Fort Duncan area is a very important part of our city's history. It is obviously an area that was established in the 1848-1849 area of the time frame that pretty much it was shortly after the Mexican-American War. That's the reason why the fort was established. In those early years, that was the 1849 was when the city of Eagle Pass was formally established, but not under that name. It was under Camp Eagle Pass. So there's a lot of great history that came to from this with the fort and with the creation of our town and our city as it evolved throughout the years. So, and within the fort area, we are looking at approximately 8 historic buildings. Those buildings bring in a lot of history because currently right now we had what is the museum that is located within one of these historic buildings that carries all of the history of our community, not only specific to Fort Duncan, but we see what is 2 magazine quarters, the commander's quarters, the stone hospital that was there, as well as a number of operational activities that happened for the fort in those years. So it is something that is very crucial to preserve and protect, and to make sure that we continue with our efforts as a city to bring forth greater opportunities for that area.
We'll visit Fort Duncan with Mayor Cantu very soon, but first we wanted to stop in next door and take a look at the Maverick County Courthouse, a landmark of the Texas-Mexico border area built in 1884 and 1885 during the term of County Judge Thomas Lamb, on the site chosen by a citizens committee who donated $800 towards the purchase of land from R.E. Moffett. This was the site of the celebrated Dick Duncan murder trial in 1889. Duncan was accused of killing 4 members of a San Saba family as he was escorting them to Mexico and convicted on evidence gathered by Sheriff W.N. Cook and Texas Ranger Ira Atten. The early jail was replaced in 1849, a fine example of Victorian design with crenellation that suggests a fortress. The courthouse is a border structure with great architectural significance. The clock tower still holds its original E. Howard Works and bell. Often the courthouse and jail were built at the same time, and often they were the first buildings on a desolate landscape. Similar photos exist for El Paso and Marfa, where the buildings appear to be on the surface of the moon.
This is one of the actual general's rooms. It is said to be known that the generals have actually sat here and had their cigars.
We're in Eagle Pass, Texas to learn the history of Fort Duncan there. We've met up with Mayor Ramsey English Cantu to show us around the fort and what remains there at the Rio Grande River in Eagle Pass. Hi Mayor, how you doing?
Doing just fine, how are you?
Doing fine.
Great, welcome to Eagle Pass and welcome to Fort Duncan.
Fort Duncan. Now this place, it looks kind of like the ruins of Fort Duncan.
Yes.
Tell me about this place.
Well, this particular area here where we are today is actually the ruins of the Barracks, which is pretty much part of the, as you know, in 1868, this is when this entire area of Fort Duncan was actually built and put together in order to work towards and to put a purpose for the Mexican-American War that took place on this particular area. So we are here today seeing some of the efforts of keeping up with our history and knowing all of the great work that is going on here in our community to preserve that history that is very important to us.
Now I'm seeing tile here on the ground, and it looks like maybe we're standing in what was a room, or was this like an outside
Actually,
area?
this particular was the porch area to the area of the barracks.
Okay.
There was specific areas that were considered obviously rooms that were into certain sections. So there was specific outdoor areas, and this was specific also that there were areas of rooms, additional rooms that came out for the barracks.
Okay.
So this is some of the remains that actually lasted. You'll see actual tile in one portion of this area. On the other, you won't see that over there.
Okay.
So
this was a nice porch area, and I'm noticing what looks like charcoal area here. Would this be where something burned? Something like the building burned?
The entire, obviously through the efforts obviously of when we were doing all of the research, these are specific areas where some of it did commence. There were obviously areas within the kitchen area is where everything did start. That was in the early 80s that caused the area to actually perish. We're looking at approximately in the late 60s, early 50s, late 60s is when this area was converted into a country club for our community. And at that time, during the time that it was actually in operation, was when this fort actually did catch fire. And today we see, of course, the remains of the historic Fort Duncan barracks.
So I understand there's like an effort underway to restore this place. What does that involve?
Well, you know, the city council and we've been working tirelessly in order to continue with the preservation efforts. As you know, we visited a number of sites today that have shown the efforts of the historical preservation within our community. However, here with this location, exactly what we are looking at doing is looking at an overall restoration of it. There are currently engineering studies that are ongoing in order to assure that we can preserve what is the history of the building, but also looking towards ways that we can actually make it more to utilize it more for our public and for the general community to enjoy. Just with the basics that we have done in order to keep it a little bit more advanced and let people come out to this area, we've seen a huge use, and that's just with basically doing a cleanse, we should say, of the area. So once it would be fully functional, it definitely would be a great area for people to come out and utilize it even more.
there's a lot to this place that you can't see when you just pull up in here. Can you show us around some of the key features?
Sure. Let's start back up over by the kitchen area, and that way we can start off the official tour.
All right, sounds good. Wow. So what was this room?
So these are specific areas within the fort, obviously, that were very important. As you know, back on July 4th, 1865, that's when General Shelby was still within the area, and it was the last strong Confederacy stronghold that was here within the area. This is one of the actual general's rooms. It is known, or it is said to be known, that this is where they would ultimately meet and strategize. So there's a lot of history to what this area brings and what we're doing to preserve it. So
wow.
This is we can obviously say we've been in an area that the generals have actually sat here and had their cigars, and who knows, what else was all discussed at that time. Amazing. But the history is absolutely impactful for our community.
Very cool.
Yeah.
The mayor mentioned a General Shelby. General Joseph Shelby was a Civil War general who has a very interesting end to his career. In June of 1865, rather than surrender, Shelby and approximately 1,000 of his remaining troops rode south into Mexico. Reportedly, Shelby sank his Confederate battle flag into the Rio Grande near present-day Eagle Pass on the way to Mexico rather than risk the flag falling into the hands of the Federals. In 1867, Shelby returned to his home state of Missouri and resumed farming. In 1893, General Shelby was appointed U.S. Marshal for the Western District of Missouri and retained that position until his death. He also appointed an African American to office, which led to, quote, a bitter feeling among some of his neighbors. Shelby, however, defended his actions. He died of pneumonia at his farm near Adrian, Missouri in 1897.
So this particular area is the kitchen area. This is what actually is the area where the fire took place in the early 80s.
We're in Eagle Pass, Texas, exploring the ruins of Fort Duncan, a relic of the Mexican-American War. In later years, the Barracks became a country club. It was during that time that the kitchen caught fire and gutted the building. We're exploring what remains of the historic fort with Eagle Pass Mayor Ramsey English Cantu.
So as we're stepping through this particular area, we're actually going to fast forward a little bit and go to the 80s when this is the particular area in the kitchen that was known that actually caused the fire for the loss of this particular area to take place. So this particular area is the kitchen area. This is what actually is the area where the fire took place in the early 80s. As you can see, the colors of the floor tiles and the tile on the walls, it kind of gives itself to that time frame. Yeah. But this was what caused the fire to actually spread throughout the entire barrack area. The roofs of these particular areas were wooden roofs, so heavily when the fire took storm here from the stove area, it heavily took over the roof systems, carried on into the next building, which is literally, we're not even talking more than 5 feet away from the barrack itself. And that is what caused the entire area to catch fire and pretty much perish in its well-known history.
So this would have been like a stove area.
This is the stove area.
Been a hood type.
That's correct.
Scenario there,
yeah.
And no roof, and I wonder, fire extinguishers maybe not put to good use. Possibly?
Maybe that might have been at that time.
And what is through this cool little portal here?
So this area will actually lead you into what is the just be careful. Yeah. But this is actually what was part of the original pantry of the area. So all of your goods were actually stored here in this particular area, and this is where a lot of the preparations would take place for pretty much what was the commanding quarters in the earlier years, but also in the later years in the 80s when all of this was well underway with the country club that was going on at the time.
So you got places to store your canned goods, your dry goods, and then the opening for your big screen TV.
That's correct. Your plasma, we should say, right?
Yeah,
the plasma.
Right.
There it is.
I need to be careful over here. These guys are not appreciating my presence.
No, they're not.
No.
So we better be careful with those. Yeah. Those are what you call, I guess, our South Texas bees.
Yeah.
So they are very territorial.
They mean business. What is this?
So this is ultimately the back portion of the actual barracks and what was the country club. This is the particular. This is, although this is not part of the original barrack system, but this was the.
Wait, you mean the generals didn't have their own full-service bar?
They didn't have their own full-service bar, but the country club did in the 80s. This was an establishment that was put in much later, and ultimately you would see that there were particular areas here. This was considered to be what was the ice chest area, and dry ice was put in here. And pretty much you had your assortment of beverages. That's the...
Wow, they were going to town out here.
Yeah.
Cases of it. Goodness. Cool. Observations by Bob. Well, you know, there's something about it that's still very beautiful.
Yeah, there is. We've been working very hard in order to kind of keep it in its history. We've done a lot to kind of keep up with what needs to be done. They've obviously kept up with its landscaping that still is obviously being, and it's tough. In South Texas, you can't keep some of these things, especially with an area that isn't used on maybe on a daily basis, but it is an area that we're very proud of. So we've made sure that it is in full bloom, and nice. there's much work to still be done.
And what was this big room here, Mayor?
This was actually part of the main barracks. This was the room that has obviously the most history, because it was considered to be the area where everyone would convene. There obviously was pretty much your areas where you would come in and have your dinners through the barrack years. And then through the country club years, this was actually the main ballroom that was considered. Okay. This room was completely opened.
So is this fireplace over here restored?
This is actually the original fireplace. There hasn't been any restoration efforts that have been made on it.
Really?
However, it has been cleaned. Well, I can tell you that we've been here at some events and actually seen bats fly out of there. So you might not want to actually be there, but it is something that is a bit interesting to see when you're actually sitting out here and enjoying the cool South Texas weather. Yeah. When you get to see some bats actually fly out from the top portion of the chimney.
Right.
So
we won't disturb them.
Yeah, we won't. It's pretty much just like those bees back there.
Yeah.
We got bees and bats. Huh?
Bees and bats. And this is their place now.
That's right. For now. So you'll see the actual original hardwood floors that are in between this, but there's tile, that was placed on linoleum tile that's actually there. You'll see some chunks of that. That's from the times that it was a country club.
We're continuing our tour of Fort Duncan in Eagle Pass, Texas. The fort dates back to the days of the Mexican-American War and is linked to several other wars down through the years. The old fort was later converted into a country club. In the 1980s, a fire started in the kitchen and left only the stone walls standing, except in one area where the original hardwood floors are barely surviving. And so this was sleeping quarters whenever it was the barracks.
Correct.
Ooh, yeah. Old hardwood floor.
Be careful.
Yeah, a little bit of tile in here.
So you'll see the actual original hardwood floors that are in between this, but there's tile, that was placed on linoleum tile that's actually there. You'll see some chunks of that. That's from the times that it was a country club.
So original floor, later floor, and then even later.
Correct.
This tile.
Correct.
Over here.
So this particular area, we're currently standing above about 2 feet off of the actual foundation of this particular space. This was originally, they were known to be, of course, sleeping quarters for the barracks during that time. During the time that its use of the country club was one of the areas where it was known that ladies would come in and take classes and do very interesting ornate crafts at times. So it was something that was very unique for the country club as well.
And Mayor, what happens is we walk into a new room, and then before we even get finished talking about that room, I see another room.
Another room, yes.
That I'm interested in. Let's go back here.
Alrighty.
So what was this room?
So this particular area, and this room was actually the restrooms.
Oh, okay.
Or as we would say it on the Texas-Mexico border, los baños.
Oh, okay.
This is where the facilities were located, and pretty much it was part of the original quarters. As you know, the sleeping quarters were in this particular room, so there was a need for having showers and facilities available for the individuals that were utilizing the barracks at the time.
Very cool. And some of the only wood that I've seen throughout the entire place that wasn't affected by the fire. This door frame right here.
Yeah, that's true. This is this particular area. We're looking at that. There's obviously still hinges. This may not be part of the original portion, but it is definitely one. You'll see some of how the actual work there. It's part of the older hinges of actually the door frame. So yeah.
Nice. It's nice to see something survived.
So it's something, huh?
Bringing this place back to life. What are the plans?
Well, our plans right now is that we're ultimately finalizing to assure that the engineering structure it will hold from the actual buildings. We need to protect that as it is a Texas historical protected site. So we're working together with the Historical Commission and assuring that, but our plans are ultimately to bring this back to full life.
Near the ruins of the barracks are more buildings related to Fort Duncan, one of them housing a museum full of Eagle Pass history. Mayor Cantu took us there to look around.
So right now we're actually within the historic Fort Duncan Museum, and Bob, I'd like you to actually meet our museum curator, Mr. Jeff Taylor.
Hey Jeff,
glad to meet you. Going great, going great.
What a collection of stuff you have here at the museum.
We have tons of artifacts. Let me first tell you about right here, right behind you here. The Seminole Negro Indian Scouts. Now these were slaves that were owned by the Seminole Indians in Florida. A bunch of them escaped, came across here into Mexico. Now U.S. enlisted them, brought them over here as the Seminole Negro Indian Scouts. Inducted here at Fort Duncan and then sent to Fort Clark in Brackenville. And 4 of the guys got the Medal of Honor back in the day. July 4th, 1865, General Shelby shows up to Fort Duncan, which had been abandoned. He shows up with 500 Confederate troops, cannons, runs a battle flag up our pole. They go over and talk to Emperor Maximilian over here in Mexico to join up with him. The next day, on the way to Mexico, they take their battle flag and they bury it in the middle of the Rio Grande. So the graveyard of all the Confederacy is here in Eagle Pass, Texas.
Rather known as the Graveyard of the Confederacy, or for the rich military history there, Fort Duncan is a site you can still visit, and I'm sure Jeff Taylor wouldn't mind showing you around the museum there to see the items related not only to Fort Duncan, but to the history of the border city of Eagle Pass, Texas. Down the road, there's another lost legend waiting to be discovered, and on Expedition Texas, we're going to find it.